We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and we are in the very last portion of his commentary where Sri Aurobindo explains a very unusual part of the text. You will recall the verses we have read so far. The first and second verse describe the cosmic horse, the divine creative power that casts out the formed universe out of the unmanifest, which has as the front, as its head, the power of vision, life force, and formation in the sight, the breath, and the open mouth, and thus forms the universe. And as the horse moves forward, it forms the new realities, unfolds new potentialities, and as it moves forward, as if the flow of time, behind is receding the past, which fades away, loses energy, dies out, lapses back into the unmanifest. And this is the grand vision of the cosmic horse. But in the last portion, this horse takes on 4 different streams of energy or qualities of energy. One upbearing the gods, another carrying the Gandharvas, the third carrying the Asuras, and then the fourth carrying humanity. And we have seen Sri Aurobindo explains the specific terms used to describe the horse, describe the characteristics of each of these beings. And for humanity, the name of the horse is Ashva. And Ashva, Sri Aurobindo notes, relating it to the next verse, has to do with this character of Ashanaya Mrityu, that is hunger, which is death, which devours, and the nature of the material world. Now this was the background where we had paused. And then the text says, the sea was his brother and the sea was his birthplace. We read last time Sri Aurobindo's explanation for this briefly, but it is worth elaborating to see many more finer insights that we gain as we dwell on this text. First, we notice that this horse, that is the power, the energy which carries humanity, has a brother and has a birthplace. But the brother and the birthplace are exactly the same. Now, in Sanskrit, the passage goes, Samudra eva asya bandhu samudro yoni. So, the ocean alone is its bandhu. You could translate as brother, friend, but the real term the root comes from bandha, binding, something which binds, which unites, which is of the same nature. So by extension, it is a term used also commonly in Sanskrit to describe friend. Sri Aurobindo translates here the intimacy, capturing the intimacy more than friend, brother. Born of the same womb, made of the same substance, sharing of the same nature. This is the character of this bandhu. But at the same time, the samudra, the ocean, is also yonihi. Yonihi literally translated would be the womb, the birthplace, Sri Aurobindo says. So there is a creative power out of which this cosmic horse emerges to upbear humanity. But of that origin, womb, ocean, this horse is of the same nature. It is of the same substance. It is bandhu, brother. Now, if we keep this in mind, Sri Aurobindo's further commentary now reveals the full picture which is now implied in this very simple description. So Sri Aurobindo says, of this horse of the worlds who bears up all beings, the sea is the brother and the sea is the birthplace. There can be no doubt of the meaning of this symbol. It is the upper ocean of the Veda, in which it imaged the superior and divine existence. These are the waters of supra-material causality. From that, this lower ocean of our manifestation derives its waters, its flowing energies, apaha. From that, when the vritras are slain and the firmaments opened, it is perpetually replenished. Prati samudram syandamanaha. And of that, it, that is the lower ocean, is the shadow and the reproduction of its circumstances under the conditions of mental illusion, avidya, mother of limitation and death. So this image now Sri Aurobindo has given us, in which there are 4 distinct facets. First, that from that upper ocean, this lower ocean of our manifestation derives its waters. So first of all, we must recognize how these 2 oceans are different. The Veda speaks of 2 oceans, the upper ocean and the lower ocean. But if they are the same waters, then what's the point of describing them as 2 oceans? There is a difference. But the difference is subtle, seen from the highest position. Seen from within the human experience, the difference is enormous. And so, the whole human journey is an ascent, a journey from the lower ocean to the upper ocean. And yet both are oceans. In the subjective, personal human experience, these 2 oceans are so radically different. When we, as the conscious human being who is journeying in life, when we lapse our effort, when we allow our consciousness to relax and fall back without concentration, without effort, allowing it to dissipate, lose its direction, purpose, or intensity, what happens? It's as if a rising movement of consciousness falls back until it settles into what we call a mechanical, automatic, instinctive life. And where does this instinctive tendency of our life energy come from? As we keep sliding deeper, we find it gets more and more murky, dark. There is a subconscious domain from which the instinct emerges. There is below that an inconscient, where even consciousness is completely lost and you cannot even speak of consciousness. Such is the extent of the darkness. And it is a bottomless pit, an ocean. But an ocean into which you sink as if into darkness. And this is our human experience. But on the other side, when we concentrate all our energies and rise straight, ascend to the highest, it's as if we break through out of the firmament of the human mind into something vast. An illumination, a vastness, enormous, rich, intense, multifaceted. But when we experience it, it is a solid, dense, intense light. And the Veda describes it as intense, ghana, dense, condensed illumination, but it is enormous oneness. While the movement downwards leads to a fragmentation and dissolution of our consciousness, the ascent into the upper ocean leads into a consciousness of unity, but a unity which is vast, all-inclusive. And not only includes the universe, but even transcends the universe. So great, so vast. And the Rishi describes it as the truth, the right, the vast. Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, or Mahas, again massively vast. You see the similarity between the 2. The upper ocean is massive, the lower ocean is massive. As the lower ocean is bottomless, the upper ocean is also unendingly infinite. The difference, though, is the lower ocean is a fragmentation of consciousness, the upper ocean is a unity, indivisible. And this subtle distinction is at the root of everything. So, The upper ocean of the Veda is the superior divine existence, the waters of the supra-material causality. But from that, this lower ocean of our manifestation derives its waters, its flowing energies, apaha. So this lower ocean came from that. How is that possible? Why is it so different? And he explains later that in the lower ocean there is the condition of avidya, mother of limitation and death. And avidya, as we have seen in our study of the Isha Upanishad, is this consciousness of multiplicity. When the one consciousness, the one divine, chooses to know himself in all possibilities, dwells on his multiplicity, that is avidya. When the same consciousness chooses to know himself as the oneness, dwells on his unity, that is vidya. And both vidya and avidya are as if complementary facets of his own self-experience. But when we focus on avidya in exclusion, when we go on losing ourselves in detail and detail and detail, there comes a point where we forget where we began, we forget where we came from, we forget who we are, and we are lost, immersed. This is a common experience in the human consciousness, human life, when we are listening to a story. And the story now takes on richer and richer detail. As the narration goes into detail, your mind gets involved more and more until you forget who you are. You forget where you are. Only the reality of the story is your reality. When the hero suffers agony, you feel the pain, you weep with him. And yet somebody could shake you at that moment and say, "Arey, why are you crying?" And suddenly you are embarrassed, you wipe your tears, you laugh. Where has that agony gone? You may say it was fiction, but it was not fiction. For you at that point, it was the reality. And such is the story of the human soul. We in our origin have lived there, that is our home. From where we have entered into this, the lower ocean, the domain of avidya, by an exclusive concentration of attention into the multiplicity, entering the rich detail of division and further division and further division until we've actually forgotten who we are. We've forgotten where we came from or why we came. The mother describes how when the soul enters the material consciousness from its poise of rest in the psychic world, it leans towards human births, has a sense of what it wants, and accordingly is attracted to a certain vibration of consciousness. And she says, as it plunges headlong, it gathers the new material for its personality, but also it enters the dullness and darkness of the material consciousness. And suddenly, as that darkness fills it, it begins to lose consciousness. And finally, in the last entanglement, identification with the human body, it is completely overwhelmed by the clouding and the darkness and is stunned and forgets everything. And this is the point where the child awakes and says, "What is this? Who am I? Where am I? What's happening?" But the whole turn of the attention is outward through the senses. It's only as we grow a little older, we begin to stand back from our identification and hypnosis with the world. We begin to observe our own reactions. We begin to observe what are our deeper motivations, and there is an inward turn. We begin to disengage from that exclusive identification, and to the extent that we do it, we disengage from the exclusive avidya, recover slowly the underlying unity of the soul, turning back to the vidya, and when we recover that, we experience a liberation. But the liberation is incomplete unless we can, from that liberated poise, now master also our rich material experience. So this is the nature of the human journey, and we have as if accepted, chosen to enter this domain of the lower ocean, but we journey from the lower ocean to the upper ocean. When finally we recover our underlying unity and freedom, the two worlds, the two domains of consciousness, unity and multiplicity, are then to be mastered equally. On the basis of the oneness, the life is to be transformed. And this is the connection between the two. One is as if complementary to the other, incomplete without the other. And therefore, bandhu, binding together, bound together as brothers, almost as complementary. But this is the truth. And yet, in their binding together as complementary, the true relationship is the outer is an expression of the inner. The inner is the source, the inner is the womb, the oneness is the origin of the multiplicity, and not the other way around. And this is the image in the Veda as two gigantic oceans of consciousness. In between, why don't we say there is an ocean of the passage? Because that is not the human experience. The human consciousness is not oceanic, it is individualized. And there is an individual journeying. Or a group of individuals, but that is still not an oceanic consciousness. The subconscious and inconscient is oceanic. It connects to the whole universe. The superconscious is oceanic. It contains and transcends the whole cosmos. But in between is the individual soul's journey, not oceanic, limited, individualized. Now you see how the two are so deeply connected, the two oceans. Below is the individuation that takes place. The individual emerges out of the lower ocean. Above, the individual discovers his unity with the whole but retains its uniqueness. And so as if the human being links these two extremes. So from that, this lower ocean of our manifestation derives its waters, its flowing energies. And so the lower ocean came from the upper because it was the divine consciousness, oneness, which poured itself out to become the whole universe. When you look at the origin of this multiplicity of the universe, the science goes back to the Big Bang. Something burst out and became so many. But in the point from which it burst out, it was one, indivisible, spaceless, timeless. If it did not become this multiplicity of many, there would be no experience of different people, different objects, differences highlighted, exaggerated. But it had still to come out from the oneness to burst out. And so the waters of the lower ocean are from the upper. So this is the first great truth. The second, from the upper, when the Vritras are slain and the firmaments opened, it is perpetually replenished. So the replenishing is also a very important process in evolution. In the Veda, the Vritra is described as serpent-like energy. But the word Vritra, Sri Aurobindo explains, is Vritra means the opponent, obstructor, or enfolding coverer. Another of the force of darkness is Vala, a demon whose name signifies the circumscriber or encloser. Now you see, both Vala and Vritra, you have the sense of something blocking, something covering, something enclosing, suffocating, limiting. And these are all the powers of ignorance of the lower consciousness. And of Vritra, there is another passage where he says, the waters of the truth and the bliss that flow from the supreme ocean, these rivers flow not upon earth but in heaven. They are prevented by Vritra, the besieger, the coverer, from flowing down upon the earth consciousness in which we mortals live, till Indra, the God mind, smites the coverer with his flashing lightnings and cuts out a passage on the summits of that earth consciousness down which they can flow. Now you see here something very interesting. The whole description, profoundly symbolic in the Veda. The vritra is covering, blocking. Above what it has blocked are the waters of the ocean. How do you cut through this barrier? Indra comes, who is the God mind, and with his flashing lightnings, he cuts out a passage on the summits of that earth consciousness down which they can flow. And if you see how it happens, in fact, in the human experience, when we turn to the upper consciousness, where is this superconscious awareness? I turn my mind up, I'm only looking at the physical sky. There is a block, a barrier, something which covers, something which prevents, which limits. And that's how we could become this individualized human being. How did that oneness manifest to become the multiplicity? By placing something which restrains, which holds back its oneness and its intensity to allow only a fragmented expression. And this is the covering, even in the individual consciousness. Sri Aurobindo says we have this lid above the head which blocks the mind from turning up to its own higher possibilities. And how do you cut through that? And the method to cut through that, Indra with his flashing lightnings. And Indra here, in his high station, that is the divine mind, but in his lower representation, it is the power of the intellect. Concentrated power of the intellect turned upwards, and the flashings of lightnings are the intuitions which come. And observe what happens when in deep meditation and concentration, you turn your concentration upwards and as if penetrate, cut through this layer which blocks. There is a flash, there are a series of flashes of intuition by which the things begin to clear up and open up, and then there is the downpour of the divine consciousness, the light, the peace, the power, and the bliss flow down into us. And this is the common experience in the meditation. And it is this which has been captured in this description. So the requirement for the upper ocean to be able to nourish the lower ocean is vritra has to be slain and the firmaments opened by the lightnings. So the transitional passage is through the lightnings of intuition. The mind becomes illumined by the flashes of intuition, and eventually the higher consciousness flows down, settles, and nourishes the lower consciousness of the divided avidya. So this is the second important idea. Third, of that, this lower one is the shadow and reproduction of its circumstances under the conditions of mental illusion. We will use an analogy here. You will remember in the story, some of you may have seen the movie, deeply symbolic story of the Wizard of Oz. There is the journey to the city of emeralds. And as they approach the city of emeralds, they are told, now before you can enter the city, you must put on these special specs which have green colored glasses. So you put on the specs and you enter the city and everything looks green, and you say, the whole city is made of emeralds. If you take off the specs, then you see the city for what it actually is. And this is the idea that we have in our mind, in our thinking, in our vision and sight, a kind of a lens which distorts reality. The nature of that lens is that it breaks up, fragments. You have seen perhaps, often we use in modern office spaces, sheets of glass in which there is a rough surface. The light comes through from the other side, but you can't see the picture of what is on the other side. It breaks up, it distorts. And such is the screen of avidya, of the mind. When you look through that screen, everything looks fragmented, broken up. And yet the reality is that if you could take off that screen, you would see the oneness underlying. And this is why when some of the great yogis attain to that consciousness in which they see the oneness, they turn upon the world and say, I see the same world that you see, but I see it differently. Because the screen of distortion of avidya has been removed. But the fact is, the lower world removed from the screen would be the same as the upper, but with the screen now it is a shadow and a reproduction of its circumstances under the conditions of mental illusion. Except that this avidya is not only individual, it is also universal avidya. It did not need human beings to see to say, oh, this is avidya. The avidya was already there in the initial movement of fragmentation of consciousness, in the involution. But it is there everywhere. And therefore, everything here is essentially still that, but now reproduced in fragmentation, shadow and reproduction. Having understood this, we find something extraordinary. It means that right here is the key to realize that. And this is what Sri Aurobindo says next. This image not only consummates this passage, but opens a door of escape from that which is to follow. Deliverance from the dominion of Ashanaya Mrityu is possible because of this circumstance, that this sea of divine being is bandhu, kin and friend to the horse. The aparadha proves to be of the same essential nature as the paradha. Our mortal part is kin to our unlimited and immortal part, because the horse of the worlds in his essence comes to us from that divine source and partakes of its nature. And from what other except this ocean can the horse of the worlds, who is material yet supramaterial, be said to have derived his being? So now, when we look at the lower world, the world in which we live, we recognize that the energy which forms it has come from the upper world. And therefore, this is of the same essential nature, but not the same in overt nature. And this is what creates something extraordinary in this world. And let me describe it first in a few images. If you look at a flower, the bee sees the flower, it sees it differently. The deer sees the same flower, it sees it differently and responds to it differently. The human child sees the same flower and sees differently. The barbarian sees the same flower differently. And the artist sees it differently. The mystic sees it differently. And when the mystic looks at it, it sees not only the form of the petal and the flower, but he sees behind it, as if within it, the life force of the flower. He can see the life force glowing with joy or weakening in sadness. When you take a flower, if you cherish it, care for it, keep it in a vase, and every day, several times during the day, approach the flower, appreciate it, speak a few words of appreciation, whether you touch it or not, caress it, give it attention in appreciation positively, you will notice the flower will last for several days. The same flower kept and then neglected, forgotten, ignored, you will find fades out within a day perhaps. Or the same flower, if you put at it a negative criticism, oh, this flower is not perfect, this is not nice, that is not good, and so on, you'll find it wilts very quickly. And Mother has commented about this many times. There are people with whom a flower can stay in the hand. Even if it is half wilted, it will freshen up after you've held it for some time. And there are others, you give them a fresh flower and it will wilt within a very short time. And it has to do with this life force. And the mystic will see the life force behind and say, that is the real flower. But the yogi may see even deeper and see behind flower the idea of flower. What is the experience of idea by which the flower was cast out? He will see that. behind that still the causal principle of the flower, and behind that the creative will of the divine consciousness. And all of this is simultaneously there in that single flower. The upper world and the lower world of the oceans are not really separate as in a spatial distinction, they are separated only in gradations of consciousness. The unity and the oneness is there deep inside the flower, of which all this multiplicity is an expression. And so here is the key. The aparardha, the lower or outer world, is of the same essential nature as the parardha. Our mortal part is kin to our unlimited and immortal part. The word parardha and aparardha is very interesting also in this context. In Sanskrit, para, ardha, the transcending half, is the upper ocean. Aparardha is not upper half. It's interesting that lower half is not called lower half, it is called the not upper, not transcending. Because by itself it has no existence, it has existence only in relation to the other. So parardha, upper half, and then the not upper half, which is derived from the upper therefore. And yet they are both halves of a whole. And you do not have the whole unless both halves are taken in. So the flower is not fully seen as flower unless the surface part which belongs to the aparardha and the inmost part which belongs to the parardha are both seen as two halves of the whole. But now this same image we will extend to ourselves. Who are you? I am so and so. I am this body. I am this personality with this character. I have these thoughts, these likes and dislikes. All of these belong to the aparardha, the lower half. But that is only half of you. The upper half is what is behind, of which you are not conscious, but towards which you turn when you enter deep within in meditation. And that is your other half, your true half, of which this is the not other half, upper half. So you have to turn in and make an effort as if to cross that barrier, the vritra separation, which must be slain, removed, and then the two halves bridged. When the two halves are bridged, from the inner come the gushing waters which fill the outer with their immortality. From the upper ocean, the stream of divine energy fills the form of the lower world and infuses into it the magic, the wonder, the delight, the joy, and the immortality, which is native to the divine consciousness. And it is in this way that the life becomes of the nature of the divine, is divinized. And so this horse of the world who is carrying humanity with his energy, coming from there brings that mission, brings that purpose into humanity. And humanity is not fulfilled until we form the bridge between the two halves of the cosmos. So he says, we, appearing bound, mortal and limited, are manifestations of a free and infinite reality. And from that from which we were born comes friendship and assistance for that which we are, towards making us that which we shall be. This is a very compact articulation of many facets of the truth. First, we appear to be bound, mortal and limited. It's not true. We are not actually bound, mortal and limited. We appear to be. Remember when you were engrossed in the story that you were reading and you forgot who you were. You became then bound in the limitation of the story circumstances. You are playing a video game, and maybe it is a very simple game. You are punching holes in something, you are blowing up little bubbles, you are playing Tetris, whatever form it takes. You are so lost in it, you are bound within the conditions and rules of the game. But the reality is, you could at any point snap out and say, oh, it's only a game. And now I can change the rules of the game. I can enter the program and reprogram it and make it something totally different. I have that freedom. But I forgot it because I was lost. I was identified. And so I appeared to be bound in the rules and regulations of the game. Mortal and limited. Again, the limitation and the mortality are an appearance. The fact is, our consciousness is immortal and unlimited. Now, when actually we experience that, this may happen in a state of deep meditation. Sometimes it may happen by the inner consciousness simply bursting out and revealing itself. And suddenly we know, because we are one with it, we know that we have always been. We are the very substance of divinity, the substance of immortality. We can never die, we are forever. And the whole fear goes away. Not only fear of death, fear of life, fear of anything, everything just goes away. Because you are this free, unbound, immortal consciousness. Nothing can take away from that. People can put chains on your wrists. They can bind you in a room. They can try to damage the biological functioning by which the body may not function anymore. But I am free. You will remember Sri Aurobindo, when he was put in jail, first in complete isolation, solitary confinement. The first 15 days he experienced tremendous struggle and even felt as if he would go mad. And then the inner being asserted itself and everything changed. And then he had a series of spiritual experiences, etc. But it was in that condition while in jail that he wrote that poem called Invitation. And those of you who would recall the poem, he says, with wind and the weather beating around me, up to the hill and the moorland I go. Who will come with me? Who will climb with me? Wade through the brook and tramp through the snow. Not in the petty circle of cities, cramped by your doors and your walls I dwell. Over me, God is blue in the welkin. Against me, the wind and the storm rebel. I sport with solitude here in my region of misadventure have made me a friend. Who would live largely? Who would live freely? Here through the wind-swept uplands ascend? I am the Lord of tempest and mountain. I am the spirit of freedom and pride. Stark must he be, and a kinsman to danger, who shares my kingdom and walks at my side. But this whole description is of a being so liberated that the storm of the worlds can be against him and still he walks freely, fearlessly. And the freedom can override all the circumstances of life. But such is the condition of the spirit, liberated even if the body appears to be in a condition of bound mortality, limitation. And this is what we truly are when we recover that. So we, appearing bound, mortal and limited, are in fact manifestations of a free and infinite reality. And from that, from which we were born, comes friendship and assistance. And this is seen in two ways in our life. From within, the surging out of that assistance. From above, the downpour of the divine strength and knowledge and grace. And these are two different experiences, although essentially the same principle. From the inner, it is from the soul, the divine embodied as a part of that divine reality. It guides in a personal way because it is specific to your own personal journey. From above, the action is more massive. It acts not only on us to liberate from our limitation, it can act on a massive scale, on a group, on circumstances, change things in a trice. But because the power comes from freedom and is a free power, it can override anything below. But the help comes, the friendship comes, but for what? It has a purpose. Towards making us that which we shall be. The goal for which we took birth, the goal for which the universe was manifested, it is towards that it will push always. You will remember when Mother was asked for help in some matter of court cases, Mother said to the person asking for help, be very careful when you ask for my help, because my help will not be for your victory. It will be for the victory of the truth. So be careful which side you are on. And so the principle of the divine help always is for what is the larger, greater truth towards which evolution is moving. But the help is there constantly. He concludes, from our kindred heavens, the love descends always, that works to raise up the lower to its brother, the higher. Kindred, we are of the same origin, we are the same family. But from that heaven, which is our own home, the love descends, the force descends, and works to raise up the lower to the higher. And this is the nature of the whole evolutionary journey. There is in the evolution a constant push from within. And this is Agni who enters the domain of darkness to cast out forms. But the push from within is not always conscious until it awakens sufficiently. At first it is instinctive. I need to grow, I need to be free, I need to break out of my limitations, I need to overcome, I need to conquer. For what? I don't know. I just have to do it, otherwise I suffocate. So the push from within can only go so far. When it cannot cross beyond a certain point, then from the other side the help comes. And it breaks through the barrier which you are not able to overcome. We may ask why? Why doesn't it come always? Why does it wait till the last moment when we are about to give up? We are about to lose and fail and collapse? Because precisely in the struggle of growth, in the struggle of overcoming, we grow. Our true potential has 4 facets: knowledge, strength, harmony, perfection. But as it emerges, these have to be increased and strengthened. And so the journey of awakening is as important, the struggle in that awakening is as important as the fulfillment of the journey. If suddenly the journey was made very smooth and we got through, we would get through perhaps with weakness, with insufficiency of richness, of capacity. We would still get through to the other side, but it would be an imperfect or incomplete perfection. And therefore, there is a need for the struggle to draw out and to form the possibilities. The example which is given from nature is very apt here. If you observe the struggle that a butterfly has to make to come out of its cocoon, and it struggles for a very long time, when finally it has come out, its wings open, reveal their full glory, and then after a brief rest, the butterfly can fly away. If during the struggle we say, oh poor butterfly, it is struggling so much, and we cut open the chrysalis and allow it to come out, a strange thing happens. The butterfly is unable to spread its wings because its muscles have not developed. It is unable to fly out and will die very soon. And so the struggle of its emergence is the means by which its muscles are being strengthened until it is able to fully open out and become what it truly should be. And therefore, there is this idea of a descending help which works to raise up the lower to the higher, but that is a help which is complementing the push from below, which is struggling and not always conscious of where it's going, but which is a necessary part, at least in the initial stages. So this is where Sri Aurobindo stops his commentary, having described the first two verses of the Brihadaranyaka, and having gone through this in detail now, we have also a clue by which we can study further verses and recognize their deeper symbolism. Sri Aurobindo has translated the entire next chapter of the Upanishad, and the deeper symbol, of course, now can be followed by following the same line of interpretation. For our purpose, though, we will stop this study here and begin a new study next time, which will be the text of the Kena Upanishad. We have so far in our journey taken up Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishad, and then we took up after that the text of Sri Aurobindo's own writing in Sanskrit, which has later been named as Sri Aurobindo Upanishad, though he didn't name it as such. And then we took up the Brihadaranyaka, and it would be appropriate to take up next the Kena Upanishad text, which will be from next Sunday. In completing what we have now read of the last portion of the Brihadaranyaka and the Vedic image, I propose to read from one portion of Sri Aurobindo's description in The Secret of the Veda, where you will see all that I have just described here summarized in the Vedic symbolism in a very beautiful way. I'll just read from brief portions and you will see how the Veda describes this overall journey of life and awakening, and with particularly the symbols of the horse, of which we have read so much now. First he says, he has given a certain passage from the Veda in the chapter titled The Seven Rivers. He says, the rest of the passage describes the ascent of this divine conscious force, Agni, this immortal in mortals, who in the sacrifice takes the place of the ordinary will and the knowledge of man. From the mortal and physical consciousness to the immortality of the truth and the beatitude. Now this is Agni. What is Agni when you look at it this way? Agni is the psychic fire. When the soul aspires and turns upwards, aspiring to realize the divine, that upward intensity of its turn is Agni. As long as there is that intensity of the turn, all the rest follows. And the journey of that turn is from this material consciousness to the immortality of the truth, but in an ascent which is not a withdrawal from the material. It is an ascent which bridges the material with the divine. So the rishis speak of 5 births in humanity in this whole process of ascent. And he says, he describes these, the material, the vital, the mental, and above, where there is the vastness which opens out, and that is the upper ocean. And it is this vastness which is the proper seat or home or of Agni. And Agni is described in the hymn as ascending from the earth to his own seat. And this is the background Sri Aurobindo gives. And then it discusses the relationship with the waters which pour down. And he says, the divine power is found by the gods visible in the waters, in the working of the sisters. These are the sevenfold waters of the truth. The divine waters brought down from the heights of our being by Indra. But where are these waters? First, it is secret in the earth's growths. Oshadhi, in the plant, in the sap, the waters are secret. That is the divine stream of delight is there in the material world, in the material consciousness, in material experience, but hidden inside as the sap. So, then, first it is secret in the earth's growths, the things that hold her heats, and has to be brought out by a sort of force, by a pressure of two aranis, earth and heaven. So the mind working on matter is this mortar and pestle, crushing, squeezing to draw out the juice, the nectar of delight. Therefore it is called the child of the earth's growths and the child of the earth and heaven. This immortal force is produced by man with pain and difficulty from the workings of the pure mind upon the physical being. Consider, most of our life, we have these high ideals in the mind, and then we have the harsh physical reality and the collision between the two. The mind is trying to force the world, the life, the circumstances somehow to grow and overcome and manifest those ideals, and this is the struggle of the pain and difficulty. But in the divine waters, Agni is found visibly and easily born in all his strength and in all his knowledge and in all his enjoyment. This is the nature of the upper domains. Entirely white and pure, growing ruddy with his action as he increases. From his very birth, the gods gave him force and splendor and body. The 7 mighty rivers increase him in his joy. They move about this great newborn child and labor over him as the mares, Ashvaha. Now comes the horse in the picture. The rivers, usually named Dhenava, fostering cows, are here described as Ashvaha, mares. Because while the cow is the symbol of consciousness in the form of knowledge, the horse is the symbol of consciousness in the form of force. Ashva, the horse, is the dynamic force of life. And the rivers laboring over Agni on the earth become the waters of life. And the vital dynamis or kinesis, the prana, which moves and acts and desires and enjoys. So you see how in the material circumstances, the same energies of the divine consciousness represent themselves as life energies. And they move and act through desire and enjoyment. Agni himself begins as material heat and power, manifests secondarily as the horse, and then only becomes the heavenly fire. His first work is to give, as the child of the waters, its full form and extension and purity to the middle world, that is the life world, prana, the vital or dynamic plane. He purifies the nervous life in man, pervading it with his own pure, bright limbs, lifting upward its impulsions and desires. Its purified will in works by the pure powers of the superconscious truth and wisdom. So he wears his vast glories, no longer broken and limited activity of desires and instincts, all about the life of the waters. So you see, this passage is very interesting. It describes our human journey. When first we struggle towards awakening, the driving force is the instinct, desire, and it is a clouded flame. But as he works, he is purified, he fills the limbs with his own light and heat and purity until the upper ascent takes place. We rise into what we may call a conscious, cultured, civilized humanity, no longer living by instincts and desires, but by ideas and ideals. And then this upward movement continues. I skip a few portions where he's describing the energies in the pure mind. And then he says, this life of the pure mind is not like that of the nervous life, which devours its objects in order to sustain its mortal existence. Its waters devour not but they do not fail. They are the eternal truth robed in a transparent veil of mental forms. Therefore, it is said, they are neither clothed nor naked. So, this is in the domain of the pure mind, where we look at the ideals. And in the domain of the pure ideals, everything is so beautiful, and yet there is a clothing of the form of thought. And he says, but this is not the last stage. The force rises into the womb or birthplace. Remember the connection with the womb of the Brihadaranyaka. The force rises into the womb or birthplace of this mental clarity, where the waters flow as streams of the divine sweetness. There the forms it assumes are universal forms, masses of the vast and infinite consciousness. And this is in the supra-mental domain. As a result, the fostering rivers in the lower world are nourished by this descending higher sweetness, and the mental and physical consciousness, the two first mothers of the all-effecting will, become in their entire largeness perfectly equal and harmonized by this light of the truth, through this nourishing by the infinite bliss. So you see, as the consciousness rises beyond mind, opening to the higher, there is the descent and downpour of those pure waters which nourish, rejuvenate and harmonize all these domains of the ascent of Agni. They bear the full force of Agni, the blaze of his lightnings, the glory and rapture of his universal forms. So there's a description of the Lord here as the bull. This is the Vedic symbol. For where the Lord, the male, the bull of the abundance is increased by the wisdom of the superconscient truth, there always flow the streams of the clarity and the streams of the bliss. So this is the state of the yogi when he has attained to yoga and the divine delight pours down to fill his limbs. There is, interestingly, just after that, I'll read this because it is a very profound symbol of the soul and its relation with the divine consciousness. The Father of all things is the Lord and male. This is the divine consciousness. He is hidden in the secret source of things, in the superconscient. Agni, with his companion gods and the sevenfold waters, enters into the superconscient without therefore disappearing from our conscient existence, finds the source of the honeyed plenty of the Father of things and pours them out on our life. He bears and himself becomes the Son, the pure Kumara, the pure male, the one, the soul in man revealed in its universality. The mental and physical consciousness in the human being accept him as their Lord and lover. But though one, he still enjoys the manifold movement of the rivers, the multiple cosmic energies. And this is now the divinization, when that ascending consciousness, having touched the divine, now there he bears all the plenty of the delight, pouring it upon life. Himself he becomes the son of the divine consciousness, the pure Kumara, the male, the one. And this is the soul in man which is revealed in universality. We start as the soul in man that is struggling in its individuality, in separative consciousness. Having attained to oneness with the divine, now this soul emerges, still one, still a child of the divine, but now universal. Experiencing the entire world as his own expression, as his own body, as his own larger form. But in the human consciousness, this soul, universal now, the male, experiences the mind, mental consciousness and physical consciousness accepting the soul as the Lord and the lover. And so these parts of our nature now turn and begin now to respond freely to the will of the soul. And this is how the divine life expresses in the world. When the soul's will reflects purely and freely in the mind and in the physical consciousness, and they respond joyously to the soul's expression. So although he is one, he still enjoys the multiplicity of the rivers and the multiple cosmic energies. In each of these, I'm skipping a small portions where Sri Aurobindo gives the reference to the Rig Veda, the specific riks which describes these things. So this in sum is the journey. The last stage is this infinite consciousness into which he grows fully, and the rays of Agni's vision are now perfectly straight, no more the crookedness, etc. This also is his own new and last birth. He who was born as the son of force from the growths of earth, he who was born as the child of the waters, is now born in many forms to the goddess of bliss. She who has the entire felicity, that is to say, to the divine conscious beatitude in the shoreless infinite. And this is how in the Vedic symbolism the whole journey is represented. So with this we complete our study of the Brihadaranyaka, and you see how the symbolism of the Brihadaranyaka so closely parallels the Vedic symbolism. It is the same language, the same symbols, the same very profound depth of experience, when articulated in literal terms appearing strange to the human mind. But when we shift our perspective to the inner, everything becomes so lucid and so beautiful, so living in its force and as a spiritual experience. We will begin the Kena Upanishad study next time, which will be on Sunday next, and we can briefly now meditate on what we have just read, which derives from the last portion of the verse, which simply goes describing the horse of the worlds that bears humanity. The sea was his brother and the sea was his birthplace. Samudra eva asya bandhu, samudro yonihi.